share the agenda. And we can start with the meeting, right? If we haven't already. Okay, the YouTube is live, so Carrie can start with the introduction.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January 18th Public Design Commission meeting. We have a committee meeting today, followed by a vote on the consent agenda. Signe, do you want to start with the, oh, sorry, I do want to mention, if you're watching on YouTube, the agenda for the meeting is in the description below the video, and there you will also find links to the presentations. Go ahead, Signe.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Signe Nielsen, President of the Public Design Commission. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call to confirm commissioner attendance. When I call your name, if you could please say here. Phil Ahrens.
Here.
Lori Hawkinson.
Here.
Deborah Martin.
Here.
Karen Keel.
Here.
Manuel Miranda.
Here.
Susan Morgenthau.
Here.
Ethel Sheffer.
Here.
Merrill Tisch.
Here.
And I don't believe I saw Mary Valverde.
Yeah, she wasn't able to make it.
Okay. So we will now commence with the committee meeting. The first project on the agenda is the resolution of delegation to the executive director for the approval of minor modifications projects after final approval and minor utility and mechanical installations. Design Commission Executive Director Carrie Butler will present the proposal.
Good morning, commissioners. As you saw, the resolution was included in the agenda that was sent out a week ago. This resolution would provide limited authority to staff, Public Design Commission staff, for the approval of minor modifications to projects that have received final approval from the PDC, as well as mechanical and utility installations that are consistent with previously approved designs or standardized. So as you know, after a project receives final approval from the PDC, there are often returns with minor changes. Some of these are due to discovery of underground conditions, possibly also due to cost and or availability of materials. Some examples include the change of an RPL color for a bench in a park, realignment of paths, updating signage to match an agency font, shifting mechanical enclosures, and replacing windows with louvers to accommodate a new tenant. So these modifications to previously approved projects would need to be consistent with the approved design intent. It does not allow staff to approve changes that would alter any element that was subject of public controversy, such as in a hearing or in the press. And it does not allow staff to approve changes that would contradict any limitation or specification that was made explicit by the PDC in a certificate of approval. The second part of this resolution provides staff the ability to approve minor utility and mechanical installations. So this would be, for example, HVAC units on a roof, generators. We do see generators, and the placement of them is important. We have reviewed quite a lot of these, and we know what's consistent with previously approved projects, and we also ensure that they are predominantly hidden from public view. So again, we're not voting on this today, but we're open to questions and suggestions for edits.
I just want to say that for those of you who have not gotten an approval from the Landmarks Preservation Commission, this is consistent with the way that agency conducts business. And I would say this is acceptable to me.
I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Agreed.
Agree.
So are there any questions from members of the commission otherwise we will move on to the next project. So the next committee item is the long-term loan for the Women's House by Faith Ringgold from the Rose M. Singer Center on Rikers Island to the Brooklyn Museum. Grace will let you know when to begin.
I'm going to give control to Catherine Morris from the Brooklyn Museum. Okay, Catherine, I've given you remote control and you're unmuted. So begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning to the commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about Faith Ringgold's painting for the Women's House and its possible long-term loan to the Brooklyn Museum. I am looking to see if I don't seem to be able to forward the slides, so I'm sorry.
Okay, I can do it for you.
Thank you. Could we have the next one, please? As a brief overview, to give you some context for the current housing of the painting, what you see on the screen here is the site location of the work as it's currently housed at the Rose M. Singer Center, a jail facility for women located on Rikers Island. You can see that the painting is located in a corridor that can only be assessed by staff and people in custody who are being escorted through that corridor. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. Here you see an installation shot of the painting. On-site photos do not offer an accurate overview of the mural's current accessibility within the facility, nor can we provide any context for its current viewing, including people in custody or locking mechanisms. But the painting is, as you see, in a corridor, which is only accessible by people really moving from one location to the other in that corridor. The corridor is adjacent to the facility intake area, and people cannot stand in front of the painting or really get a good view of it. Staff also pass through the corridor and get to their posts within the facility, and can also view the painting in passing. Give the next slide, please. These are some more installation shots taken of the painting in its current location. As you can see, the very reflective nature of the plexiglass, the 2 sheets of plexiglass that cover the painting, make it additionally hard to see and understand what you're looking at when one is passing it. In a museum situation, obviously lighting and consideration for the protective facing glazing of the painting would be adjusted so that one could actually see the painting through that thick plexiglass. Read the next slide, please. The painting is housed in a silver frame, as it has been for several years. It is covered with 2 plexiglass sheets, which overlap in the center. You can kind of get a sense of that from that middle slide there. That's the place where the 2 pieces of plexi cover the painting, obviously for very important protection purposes. Both the frame and the plexi have some areas of white paint on them that need to be removed and restored. Here's the next slide, please. Some information about Faith Ringgold, who is also exceptionally glad that we're here discussing her painting today and its possible long-term loan to the museum. Faith was born in 1930 in Harlem. She is internationally known and is at this point 91 years of age. She is an artist, educator, author, social activist, and her work encompasses a variety of media, including painting, printmaking, sculpture, performance art, writing, and quilt making. She's renowned for her large painted story quilts, in particular a piece called Tar Beach, which also became a very influential children's book. Faith's work embraces a wide variety of cultural influences, primarily her own African-American heritage and a commitment to social justice politics and civil rights and feminist issues. She lived most of her life in Harlem. She now actually lives in New Jersey. but her work very much reflects her upbringing and her community. She's exhibited throughout the world, including major exhibitions in the United States, Europe, South America, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. She also has a very important and significant career survey opening next month at the new museum in Lower Manhattan. She's received more than 75 awards and honors, including a Solomon R. Guggenheim Fellowship for painting, 2 National Endowments for the Arts Award, 18 honorary doctorates, one of which is from her alma mater, the City College of New York. She was Professor Emeritus. She is Professor Emeritus at the University of California, San Diego, where she taught from 1982 until 2002. 2002, excuse me. Could we have the next slide, please? Very importantly, the idea for the mural, which became for the Women's House, originated with Faith. She was granted in 1971 a CAPS grant, the Creative Artist Public Service Program Award. And she chose to use those funds to produce a mural for the Women's House of Detention. She was motivated to do this by her engagement with the community and her engagement with civil rights issues. And she really wanted to contribute and show that her practice could be used to contribute to broad and meaningful social change. So she brought the proposal, and in the process, she began working with incarcerated women to talk to them about their ideas for what a meaningful work of art might be to them. And they said very quickly that their ideas were to imagine life after incarceration. And so the mural that you see today is very much a reflection of the ideas that these women presented to Faith for what they might be once they were no longer incarcerated. Everything from being the first woman president to being a woman bus driver in the city to being a basketball player. There's also a lovely touch in the bus, driver's bus, which is in its location destination. You can see it in the upper right corner of the painting. The bus is going to 2A Sojourner Truth Square, a wonderful reference to the history of feminism and particularly as it relates to Black women, and also to what the women, incarcerated women, told Faith. They wanted a painting that depicted the long road leading out of here. Can we have the next slide, please? I'm losing my place, excuse me. In 1972, for the Women's House was dedicated to the women of Rikers Islands. It was actually dedicated in January of 1972, so it's exactly 50 years from this very moment. The mural was actually on view from 1972. When the facility at Rikers Island began housing men in 1988, it was deemed inappropriate for the incoming male population. As a result, the painting was whitewashed. It was actually later saved with the help of an officer in the institution who remembered Faith and got in touch with her and let her know what had transpired. And as a result, the painting was restored in 1999 and saved and reinstalled in the new women's facility, excuse me, the Rose M. Singer Center, where it remains on view. The Department of Corrections, along with the Brooklyn Museum, is seeking the long-term loan of the piece to the Brooklyn Museum at this juncture. In the spring of 2017, the city committed to closing the jails on Rikers Island and creating a network of 4 modern, more humane jail facilities in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. With the impending closure of the RMSC, pursuant to that plan, we believe that Faith Ringgold's painting would be best served to become an important addition to the Ringgold holdings of the Brooklyn Museum. This arrangement, importantly, would provide for the long-term preservation of the artwork and allow opportunities for the public to access and understand larger historical context for the significance of the painting, both within Faith Ringgold's career, but also within the rich cultural history of New York City over the past 50 years. To ensure that women in custody are not deprived of the opportunity for artistic expression and enrichment, which we know is an important part of this conversation, and that there is the opportunity for healing and beauty within the jails. The Art for Justice Fund has kindly offered to fund the creation of a new community mural mural at the RMSC to take the place vacated by Ms. Ringgold's work. The new work has been discussed as possibly being a co-creation by formerly incarcerated artists and women currently incarcerated, very much in keeping with the spirit of Faith's original intention. Upon the approval of the transfer, the Brooklyn Museum proposes that for the Women's House be loaned to the new museum retrospective I mentioned earlier. The exhibition Faith Ringgold, American People will be on view at the new museum from February 17th until June 5th, 2022, after which it would be transferred and installed for long-term public view at the Brooklyn Museum. Including the mural in this major survey of Ringgold's career is very important to the artist. Could we have the next slide, please? Upon approval, the Brooklyn Museum and the new museum will secure the services of the same fine art shipper who successfully transported the piece when it was loaned to the Brooklyn Museum in 2017, where we installed it in a major exhibition at that time. A Brooklyn conservator and or registrars will be present during that packing. Our registrars and conservators have extensive experience with the painting at this point and are well equipped to oversee its transportation and packing. When the painting arrives at the museum, it will be unpacked and supervised by those same people. Upon approval of the loan to the new museum, the Brooklyn Museum and the new museum will work closely to plan for the safe and timely transfer of the painting to both institutions. Can we have the next slide, please? The museum is actively envisioning both short and long-term opportunities for the painting's display. Our goal is that the painting be on display to the public as consistently as possible. The most likely exceptions to it not possibly being on display would be the occasional logistical needs for exhibition rotations or possible conservation needs may they arise. If the painting is never not on view for some short period of time, for either of the reasons just noted, it will be secured in the museum's climate-controlled storage until its next installation plan is finalized and implemented. There will be, as there are with all works in the museum, a constant assessing and overview of the work and its condition. Can we have the next slide, please? Thanks. The Brooklyn Museum is a member of the city's Cultural Institutions Group, CIGs, whose members serve as designated stewards of city-owned facilities. CIGs are privately managed organizations operating public facilities established and maintained for the provision of cultural services and programs to the people of the city of New York. There are 34 total member institutions in the CIGs. I keep missing my page. I could just look at the screen. Here we go, sorry. The Brooklyn Museum is accessible to the public via general admission tickets. General admission ticket pricing is suggested, with most visitors paying what they wish, which often means entering free of charge. Overall, 50% of visitors opt to pay a reduced admission or, as noted, nothing at all for their admission. The Brooklyn Museum hosts for Saturdays a monthly evening of free programming, which welcomes visitors from Central Brooklyn and beyond in very vast numbers. The museum also welcomes public school groups on a regular basis, averaging 27,000 people and 975 school groups annually. And I believe that is the last slide.
It is.
Thank you very much for that really eloquent and thorough presentation. We're not going to be voting on this, but I think this is certainly open for discussion. I'll just say, I guess, that for me, what really a couple things resonated with that presentation. One is the fact that the artwork is presently not publicly accessible, and the only circumstances are not so great when one could see it. I think that it obviously has been subject to a certain amount of abuse, and it is not being well maintained at this point. I think that plexiglass overlay was just about did it for me. I feel that there has been a careful effort to ensure that this is being placed and loaned to an institution that already acknowledges the great work of this artist. And so having those pieces together is, I think, a very meaningful idea, but also the notion that there would be another piece commissioned for and the way the thinking is being considered for that second piece. So I am supportive of this.
I'd like to echo everything Signe said. I think it's a very strong proposal and a very important one in order to preserve the work of a very important artist and a very important work of art. The only thing I'd like to add is that to me, it's very meaningful that the artist herself is strongly supportive of this move. And I think here, where we're lucky to have the artist engaged in what happens to her work, her endorsement of this thoughtful move as a temporary loan to the Brooklyn Museum, I think is a strong indication of why we should support this and endorse the move.
Signe, I do see Ann Pasternak's here, so I'm going to
I do.
Okay, I wasn't there. Go ahead.
Thank you, commissioners. And I just wanted to make a few quick points. And one of them is, of course, yes, as Phil has shared, the artist has wanted this for quite some time. In fact, when we showed the painting in our We Wanted a Revolution Black Radical Women exhibition, I think 4 or 5 years ago, at that time, Faith came to us and said, is there anything the Brooklyn Museum can do to get the painting here at the Brooklyn Museum and out of Rikers? So I just think that's important, some encouraging background. I also wanted to say that when we showed the painting, it was a center of global press for that award-winning exhibition. It was just probably the single most reproduced and discussed painting of all the global press, major press we had received for that exhibition. And I also wanted to say that the Brooklyn Museum does have some history in doing these kinds of long-term, if you will, loans with the city and with the design commission, such as our Williamsburg murals. So I just thought that that would be good to know that we've already had a very successful relationship along these lines. And then finally, the museum has a commitment, ongoing long-term commitment to dealing with issues of mass incarceration. So it's a really exciting opportunity for the public, especially with our community. The largest number of people apparently going into the carceral system in New York State are coming from our local neighborhood. And so it's extremely meaningful that the museum has a commitment to talking about incarceration, and this will be a seminal work in which to discuss how things have radically changed from the 1970s to this present moment. Thank you.
Would anyone else care to weigh in? We are not voting on this, but voices are welcome. If not, I want to thank both of you very much for that really meaningful presentation. And I think we are all going to breathe better knowing that this piece is in a accessible and important location. And then, as Phil said, that it is supported by the artist, which is most important. So thank you for that. We will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the installation of Waves, an artwork by Andrea Bellag for Engine Company 268 and Ladder 137 in Rockaway Park, Queens. Rebecca will let you know when to begin. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea. I've given you remote control. You can test it. Use your mouse, keyboard.
I'm trying.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. Whoa.
So go ahead and start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, commissioners, and I appreciate this opportunity to show you what I've been working on. The artwork is called Waves, and it is through the New York Percent for Art program, and it's for Engine Company 268 Ladder 137. I just went by too quickly from, oh, all right, it's jumpy. This is the new fantastic fire station that will be built. And this is on the side, 116th Street. And the landscaped area is where the artwork will be positioned. Sorry, I'm a little clunky with this. I'm going to show you some work that was completed in my studio during this process. Like many New Yorkers, Far Rockaway was my introduction to the ocean and beach as a child. And when I returned as an adult in 2015, I was struck by the exquisite light, which gave me a feeling of well-being. Little did I know I was on the same street where I had spent time long ago. The attraction was so strong that I ended up moving into one of the original bungalows on Beach 25th Street, and it is now my part-time residence and the inspiration for my work. The painting in Waves is inspired by my walks on the beach in Far Rockaway. I use color, light, and the illusion of space and movement to interpret the movement of water. The ocean is a compelling feature in Far Rockaway, a community by the sea. Additionally, I want to include images of some of the history and community life on the peninsula. Therefore, I have merged black and white photographs into the painting. This was a temporary public work that I did for Art Prize in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was printed on latex and then adhered to 3 storefront windows. And this was my first public artwork for MTA Art and Design. There were 6 of these murals, 5 panels of glass each, so that's 30 panels of glass, painted with liquid ceramic color and fired and tempered. You can see here that it is translucent. You can see through the painting to areas outside, and on this side, you can see that it is viewable from both sides, the artwork. Project site is halfway on the peninsula. I'm trying to make this smaller, it's not working. Okay. The project site is halfway on the peninsula. I just did something bad. There we go. This is the site, and it divides the retail and commercial area from the residential neighborhood. And it is in line with the 9/11 Tribute Park. This was the original fire station that was damaged in Sandy. This is the existing site, Beach Channel Drive, 116th Street, and I think it's being used as a teaching facility for the fire department. And you can see the site for the fire station, the Rotary Park, and 9/11 tribute lined up. Again, here is the artwork location. It's in the southeast corner lot of the new fire station. This is what I originally proposed. It was a 60-foot length wall on red brick, And interspersed, I had used black and white photographs. Since then, we decided it would be a much better venue to put it in the landscape. Excuse me. We divided into 3 sections, and I've fully integrated some of the photographs into the painting. I've taken an oil painting completed in my studio and augmented the dimensions in Photoshop. In select areas, I've blended black and white photographs into the painting. Early photograph of the Far Rockaway Boardwalk, quahog, clamshells that were used by native population, fishing in Jamaica Bay, NASA photograph of Superstorm Sandy, local street flooding, Black Surfers Association paddle out honoring George Floyd, and finally the badge of Engine Company 268, Ladder Company 137. First, the glass will be digitally printed with the photos. Afterwards, the glass will be painted with liquid ceramic colors and fired. The palette for the colors will closely resemble the oil paint colors from Williamsburg Fine Art Paint, but will be adjusted to the new medium. Viridian, permanent green, ultramarine blue, manganese blue, cerulean blue, iridescent bronze, gamboge, dianthus pink, and titanium white are the source colors. I hope the artwork will enhance the presence of the fire department, the fire station, EC 268, and Ladder Company 137 as a place of civic importance. These are the details. The first panel in glass measuring almost approximately 4 feet high and 16 feet long, and with a legend in Garamond Regular Pro, and the bottom of it will be 18 inches from the bottom of the glass. The first image is 1903 photograph of Far Rockaway's boardwalk, which is the 2nd largest in the country. And here you have clamshells, which Native Americans came from different areas, as well as the local population, and used as a major source of food. And then taken these beautiful shells, which have a purple indentation, and carved them into beads and small objects. This is the second panel. These are fissures in Jamaica Bay. This is the Gill Hodges Memorial Bridge, which was built in 1937 and connects Far Rockaway to the mainland, Brooklyn and beyond. And this is Superstorm Sandy. It's a NASA photograph. And here you have a flooding street, local streets, which is very common, not only for big storms, and they are a fire hazard, and the fire department are the first responders. Here is the Paddle Out Black Surfers Association, which is a major support for the community, teaching children and adults surfing and giving free equipment. This is the badge of EC 268, Ladder 137. Here you can see in profile the 3 panels integrated into the landscape. And here are the paths, the walking paths, so that you can get the pedestrians can get through from both directions and see the work from both sides. All right, somebody else taking this away?
Yeah, why don't you go back, if you would, to the, to this plan is here. I think that's great. This is Joan Krevlin from BKSK Architects. And we've been working very closely with Andrea and Deland Studio in the siting of these panels. And we had originally identified this area, this landscape area in the east, as the place where the public was really invited as they make their way over to on Beach 116th Street to the 9/11 Tribute Memorial. So we're really thrilled to have this artwork integrated into that landscape. It allows the public to engage with the fire station while leaving the firefighters to do their work. So the panels are located parallel to the overhang on the east of our building and carefully situated within the dunes, the kind of bermed landscape that gives some topography that houses these paths with some seating. You can see the precast concrete benches that allow visitors to kind of wander through, have a place to sit. There's some shade trees there and to enjoy the art. Why don't you go to the next one? We are working again very closely with the planting that D-Land is proposing in order to have it touch and integrate with the panels, but not obscure them. So, we currently have, and you'll see in the planting, but some blue stem, some aster, some goldenrod, some milkweed that are all within sort of 1 to 2.5 feet tall. We may need to make some of these a little bit lower to not obscure the artwork. It's sitting on a concrete base, which is roughly 1 foot tall, might be 18 inches tall as we develop it. And here you can see, if you go to the next one, you can see the planting, the goldenrod, the perennials, the goldenrod, the aster, the milkweed, and the blue stem in the grasses that are the plants that D-Land is proposing. But again, I think we will be looking very closely at the height of these plants relative to the panels as we finalize the base design. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, go back. I want to talk about the base for a second. So I'm sorry, if you can go back to that section. Here we go. The intention is for the panel to be held on a concrete base. The paths will be, and it'll be an architectural concrete. It will be wider than is shown in the sketch. We're working very closely with Thornton Tomasetti, our structural engineer. The challenges for this artwork is that we're in a very high wind area. So we have to design for high wind load, but we also did not want there, working with Andrea, we did not want there to be a frame around the artwork so that it will sit in a concrete base, which is going to be probably about 1 foot. Well, we don't know the exact dimension, maybe 10 inches across. We're looking to see if we can taper it as it holds the artwork, and the artwork will sit in a shoe. This detail isn't here yet because we're still working through that. But I think that one of the questions had been, how does the material of the base relate to the architecture? And what it relates to is the material on the ground plane, where the paths will be a similar coloration, and to the paving that the visiting apparatus will sit on in that same area. Okay, you can go forward, I mean.
These are the 3 panels. Is this good? These are the 3 panels with the legend material. And I'm researching to double check and make sure all the information is accurate, and we have access to all the copyright material, and there's no problem in reproduction. This is a sample that I made for the MTA project, testing out their colors, and you can see that they really was a full variety, a full spectrum. And one of the reasons liquid ceramic is used is that they have such vibrancy. And here is more on the glass study, the glass support. I think what we've ended up doing is using 3 panels instead of originally the 2. I think that's what we're going towards, is 3 panels in this support. And the maintenance, I've chosen glass as the foundation for waves because it is durable, the colors are permanent, and it is a tried and true medium for public art. After the printing and painting, the glass is fired, tempered, and treated with an anti-graffiti coating. The maintenance is straightforward and will not require any treatment outside of regular maintenance for the fire station and the grounds. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a question. Okay, now I see the entire screen. I don't believe that the landscape architect is present today. Is that correct?
I will speak for them and bring back any concerns that you have or questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to start us off?
I just had a question about the text for the legends. Is there a reason why you wanted to put it directly on the artwork? I think for me, it kind of interrupts the art, interrupts the artwork a little bit and makes it a little bit didactic, but I'm just curious, like your thought, you were thinking of like placing it directly onto the artwork as opposed to a kind of like maybe label on the foundation of some sort.
On the concrete, I just want to make it visible. I don't feel like it has to be on the artwork. I sort of agree with you. And I will use any solution that makes it user-friendly. I don't want people to have to bend down too low or to be obscured by the grass or plants. And if there is another solution, I'm happy to look at it. This was just done for everyone to know what they're looking at and to have that, visible and accessible.
Mhm.
But I'm not, absolutely tied to it if there is a better idea.
I mean, I don't have an idea or, solution for it. I guess my thought is that, as opposed to like the MTA paintings, where it's, you're kind of absorbed into the artwork. I think the artwork is very beautiful. There is a kind of interpretive element showing historical images. And I wonder if, placing the text directly onto the artwork, makes it a little bit too like didactic. I'm not giving a specific direction. It's just a kind of response to it.
Well, I'd be happy to look at that further and maybe troubleshoot with some of my other team members and see if there is another option. I'd be happy to look at that. And I appreciate your response.
I had a, let's see here. I had a question. If you can hear me.
Yes, Laura.
So I'm just curious because we had seen the building, it's a very handsome building, come before us and we followed it along. And I'm just curious why we're just seeing the artwork now. It seems kind of late and I'm just, I'm not necessarily commenting on the work itself, I'm commenting on the potential of the integration of the artwork with the architecture and the landscape. So that seems, to be something that this program is really all about, and it's an opportunity for those things to congeal. And so just maybe it's a question not for the artist, but for somebody else.
I'll take that one.
Oh, okay.
I would say that we've been working with Andrea throughout this whole design phase. Part of it is just trying to understand when, part of it is the logistics of, when Andrea's work was ready for community board presentation before we brought it to concept to PDC. But that said, I think that we have been really very working very closely from the beginning, particularly when we first were working with Dylan to develop the landscape, and we were recommending that the artwork be moved from the wall that was originally proposed to this landscape. And so our process has been fairly thorough from the beginning. And I actually think that when we started to look at the building coloration back when, I think, Lori, it was your suggestion, we were really pleased at how much better the artwork worked with the gray tone. We were struggling with the red brick and the kind of blue greens of the artwork, which seemed appropriate. And we were actually quite pleased when we switched to the gray materiality to have it be much more coherent. We've always focused on this landscaped area as the place where we wanted the artwork to be, because it's where we're inviting the public in. It's where the fire department wants the public to engage. And we were happy to give it another layer. And so we spent a lot of time, architecture and landscape, and with Andrea looking at the proportions of it, the kind of way the berms work and the paths. So I don't think you've seen it so coherently, but we've been working at it consistently as a collaborative process.
Thank you. And just one other question about, is the glazing, the glass is transparent when you show the section?
It's transparent, but when I paint over it, you look through the color. So it's not, I would call it translucent, or it's not absolutely clear, but it's clear enough so that you see through and you can see both sides.
I mean, it would be interesting to, as it's studied, maybe we look at those sections to, I know you had the views of the piece itself, right? Well, with the material on it. So if we could understand, because it's on a berm, how the height, this 4-foot height, when I'm looking at it, but I'm also looking through, what is the intention of that, and what am I looking at? Am I looking at people on the other side? How is it set up? Because I noticed that they're all three kind of angled in the same direction in the site plan. I know the landscape architects aren't here, but you guys can speak to it probably.
Yeah, and I think that what we were interested in was the landscape before it started as sort of kind of representation of the duned kind of landscape topology in this area, and the fact that the artwork is speaking to the idea of dunes as well, I think, and waves, or the movement of the water and the land in response to being on the coastline. I think that we think there's a real benefit to seeing the plant material through the glazing so that they become an integrated experience, as opposed to, which is why I think we're okay with a little bit of overlap between the planting and the artwork. It's almost as though the artwork is growing out of this dune out of this sort of dune landscape. So we see a pretty close correlation between the planting and the landscape and the artwork. And as we continue to sort of look at the base and the height, I think we're looking to have it not feel like it's landed, but it's really growing out of the landscape. And so are interested in seeing the planting material through it. So it's not a solid thing. I don't think, and I think sometimes you'll see people and sometimes you won't. I don't think it's going to be, a packed, sort of place. But I think the idea that people then become part of it is another layer that I think speaks to the relevance of the artwork.
It's also my intention at this point to do a very thin layer of white over all three pieces of glass, and then do the printing and painting on top of that. And that would make it still translucent, but less disruptive.
And we will get some samples. We will get samples of the material so that we can do some testing about translucency. We're still continuing to refine the plant palette. And I think that we've been having a really good collaboration, which I think will continue to make sure that the landscape, the dunes, and the landscape and the planting and the artwork continue to read holistically, as a shared kind of vision.
Yeah, I guess
Go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
one last comment on that, because I'm interested in how, in this plan, I guess if we had a detailed plan, maybe, did we see that? I don't know where, because you have seating also where these are in the site with the topography and the seating. So at some points you'll be looking through, like in the center one, number 2, you'll be looking through this at the building facade and the entryway, right?
Yeah, so that's an overhang where the visiting apparatus will be. So sometimes there will be a truck there, sometimes not, depending on whether training is in process. So that's not where the main vehicle lives, that's where the training vehicle lives. So sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I do think that's where what Andrea's talking about at the studying of how translucent it is, or it will be translucent, but how transparent will be important so it doesn't get too busy, right? So I think that we want to be able to read the kind of presence of planting and the presence of mostly the planting, but we don't want it to become distracting. So I think looking at the level of transparency when Andrea's able to get some glass samples will be important. And the seating are low pebble benches. They were in the architectural presentation, but they sit close to the ground and they're kind of flat pebble shaped pieces. So they don't have a lot of articulation to them. They don't have backs that are, they don't have a lot of line to them. which I think, again, will make them not distracting in any way, but part of the reading of the landscape.
I'm going to chime in here. Deborah, did you want to say?
Go ahead, Signe. I can follow you.
Okay. Well, Joan, I think you mentioned this right off the bat, but the choice of plant material right now and the intent, as I hear it described, are completely not in sync. The plant material that is on the palette right now gets to be at least 30 inches, if not taller. And so that has to get reconceived. But I'm worried that if it remains a palette that recalls the dunes, these grasses will have to get cut down every year. And as such, the presence of the base and the relationship of the base to the piece is going to change over the course of the year. And I think that needs to be thought through. And I just have to say that it is somewhat gratuitous of you to say that the benches are placed in the shade of trees when those two conifers are about as skinny as you can get. So if you do really want shade, then those should not be junipers. And then the only other thing I'd say is, and Manuel stated this at the beginning, is that the text, albeit I think a general question about whether this level of didactic intervention is appropriate, it is only 2 feet off the ground. It seems incredibly small, and it's not that close to the path. So I'm not really sure, not to mention the fact that under the current plant palette, it'll be totally obscured by August. If you look at panel 2, there's no way that somebody on the path could read that. I appreciate that panel 1, the text, if it is the way I understand it, is on the right side of the east-facing panels. Then you could probably read it on 1 and 3, but you definitely can't read it on 2, especially if the font is the size it is. So I really think that has to get rethought, and the planting. I do not see this. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but I do not see this as an integrated landscape art solution. It's not in any way a criticism of the artist, but this is not integrated.
Yeah, again on the text, it potentially could just be a separate, interpretive sign. Like just looking at the renderings, I just think it really takes away from the integrity of the artwork to just, it's like putting like a museum label directly on a painting or something. So
I'm happy to.
Beyond the kind of just like, UI or user experience aspect of it too, I think that Signe brought up. I just think it interrupts like the artwork. It makes it like a billboard kind of stuff.
Okay.
I think that's no issue. I think that we can look, and it could even be, whether we do it 3 times or as one single kind of piece of signage because I think that, watching Andrea's process, I think that the images are really meaningful. And I do agree that it would be nice to be able to read it and understand why those images are chosen, because they've been really carefully selected. And I think we can work to see about removing the signage and putting it separately. And Signe, I hear you about the planting. We've been having these conversations ongoing, and we will revisit that planting relative to the artwork. I don't think that's going to be an issue.
I have an additional question. Oh, I know. Go ahead, Deborah.
Minor fix.
Thanks, Lori. My question was sort of along the same lines of Lori and Signe's questions about integration. And I was just wondering, the artwork is beautiful and it is very appropriate given the context. And I'm mindful of the fact that you're passing through there on the way to the 9/11 memorial. So it gives a certain narrative about the location of this artwork as well as that memorial. So I'm wondering, how is the decision made about the placement of these 3 pieces within that kind of dune landscape? like how were they cited, the three pieces in the landscape? Because I just wonder what the rationale is for where they are, and even the fact that they are, let's say, flat instead of curved, or like, was any thought given to that integration of the dune and the piece and the circulation?
Joan, do you want to talk
Sure.
to them?
Yeah, we did a whole series of studies with Andrea and D-Land about how to cite them, and wanted to, and in part because the piece started as a single piece, we thought that the fact that they are running all parallel to each other, that they have a relationship to the geometry of the building, and can be read almost sequentially as you move through it. In the series of studies that we did, was the one that we felt was the strongest. And so that the paths have been, they weren't just, the paths weren't there first, that the idea of the paths were there. We then worked with Andrea to sort of cite the pieces and then worked the paths back through them so that they had good visibility and you could see them from different perspectives as you moved through it. So I think that it was trying to both be responsive to the building geometry, to the movement through that site, and to be able to read them both individually. And if you're on the sidewalk, you kind of see them as a collection of pieces that kind of could be almost be reassembled in a way. I think that curving it, I think would make it even more complicated relative to the building, and also probably prohibitively costly. I think it would be an interesting exercise if we had lots of budget, which I know Andrea is really hard up against the budget. We also spent a lot of time looking at the proportion of them with Andrea, and kind of wanted to have them read relatively horizontally. So the 4 foot by 16 foot height kind of gave a sense of movement as you move through it. And they felt kind of linear as opposed to too tall and kind of like stoppages in a way. They felt too static when they were taller. So we did quite a lot of study about proportion and how you kind of come upon them as you move through the site. We could certainly continue to study those paths. I don't think they have to be fixed in stone yet. So maybe you get closer to the first one as you're coming in the front. But the idea is that you weave through them and engage with them and encounter them was what we were kind of interested in.
I had just one follow-up question, which when I was looking at the section, when you brought it up again, if we could go back to that. The section looks, where is the concrete in this section?
Andrea, go to the last page, because this is an earlier study about height, and this is more of a structural drawing right here. So this is a more accurate representation, and we're looking to see whether we can taper the concrete towards the top so it's not quite a shelf. So if you see on the right, the glass panels will sit in the concrete almost like a glass railing in a shoe. We did a series of studies that had a metal frame around them. We're trying to keep metal off the site as much as we can. We certainly didn't want to frame the artwork. And so this as a strategy feels like the most inobtrusive strategy, but I don't think we have sized or proportioned that footing correctly yet. I think from my perspective, I think it's too chunky at the top. And I'm hoping that we can taper it so that as it reaches the panel, it just doesn't have such a hard edge. And we're looking at that right now with our structural engineers. And so you'll see that at our next presentation.
And you're going to be looking at, you won't be looking at architectural concrete. This is a footing. So that's just something else I know you know that.
Yes, but we can control the color to a certain extent, which we've done before. it is architecture. It is a footing, but we can kind of have it be, have a certain amount of control in terms of the quality of it and how we do it.
And then the reason, one final question, the reason for the three pieces being all the same length?
That was my choice. It's not to prioritize. It was sort of a timeline in the way I conceived it. The first panel being the earliest history of Native Americans, and then the beginning of the boardwalk, and then the second one being Superstorm Sandy. I don't know who's doing what over here. I don't have the controls anymore. And more towards contemporary events, like the Black Surfers Association. So it was vaguely a timeline, and it just seemed to make sense to me.
Andrea, I'm controlling. Is there a specific slide you want to go to?
No, I was just answering. I'm very happy for you to take control.
And there's only one other thing, and I I have to defer to Carrie on this, but at today's meeting, unfortunately, we are missing our two artists members, and I know that really the conversation that comes out of today will help guide you in the next month before you come back for a conceptual vote. And so I wonder, Carrie, is there a way that we can get input from our artist members before this is sort of finalized as our?
So we did informally review, sorry, I'm going to mute you from feedback. We did informally review the project with Kenseth Armstead, Commissioner Armstead, and the response we got from Kenseth was whether or not the artists had considered increasing the height of the glass panels to 8 foot so that the artwork is more immersive. I do not think we did not show this with Mary, but we can definitely seek a little more feedback for the team before they move forward too far.
I can answer that it would just be way too unwieldy and somewhat dangerous to have something 8 feet, especially if we're going to have it as a horizontal. It just, it would look fabulous, but it's just not possible.
Okay. So thank you very much for that, and make sure no other commissioners wanted to weigh in. If not, thank you, and we look forward to this coming back. And we are now going to move on to the next two items are combined. It is the Douglas and Little Neck Library in Little Neck, Queens, and the installation of A Bit of Everything in Brief by Misha Khan at the same library. Grace will let you know when to begin. Thank you.
So I've given control to Sarah at BKSK. Dora, do you have a question? We have your Dora.
Yeah, hi, it's Dora from DDC. Unfortunately, Misha is not here and we have not been able to get in touch with him.
Is there anybody else who can do the presentation? Can we also unmute George from BKSK? Dora, can you do the presentation, or anybody from BKSK?
I don't really feel comfortable. George, do you feel comfortable presenting Misha's work?
No, I definitely don't feel comfortable presenting it. I think he has a great perspective on producing a piece of art for a library, and it'd be very important to hear from him. No, I was simply unmuting and raising my hand because I thought you hadn't designated me as the presenter.
Oh, okay.
For the
Okay. Well, why don't we, Carrie? Why don't we start with the library, and if Misha comes, it can continue. If not, I suppose we could consider this project withdrawn from the committee meeting. Does that sound good, Carrie?
Yeah, that's great. Well, hopefully Misha will join while we're doing this first part, and then at the very least we can just show the images so people have something to think about.
So I give control to Sarah. Sarah, will you be controlling the remote? Okay, great. Okay, go ahead.
You all set?
Yes.
Great. So you're getting a lot of BKSK at this point, I gather. My name is George Schieferdecker of BKSK Architects. I have with me, I hope, I don't see them right away, but Harpreet Dhaliwal and Sarah Rutland. I also have Wendy Andringa of Assemblage Landscape Architecture. Misha Khan, hopefully, will arrive in time to present his artwork. And we're very pleased to present the completed design development of our project and the concept development of the art for a new library to serve the Douglaston and Little Neck community. The borough plan that you have in front of you indicates that the library site is at the eastern edge of Queens. Let me just get my annotations going. On the eastern edge of Queens, close to Little Neck Bay, between the neighborhoods of Douglaston and Little Neck. Can I go to the next one? So what's very obvious on our site are the sort of fingers of salt marsh greenery that extend into the neighborhoods, excuse me, adjoining our site. At the same time, the site is bisected by the very heavily trafficked thoroughfare of Northern Boulevard. Normally, I'm able to annotate these things, but I can't seem to draw the line.
Yes, sorry, we've turned off annotate to prevent
I
any
see.
sort of
Okay,
Zoom bombers, and also chat is also off.
All right, never mind then. Can we pop back, please? Back slide. One more. So that juxtaposition of the Northern Boulevard up against these fingers of greenery is one of the first major themes for our design. So next. In the local context, we're surrounded by kind of strip urbanism, parking lots on a lot of these corners. 249th Street on the left side of your screen is a residential street. Northern Boulevard, the very busy thoroughfare I've talked about. What we've tried to do is create a very sort of prominent, obvious, and dynamic presence on this corner. Next. The existing library is shown here. It will be demolished in its entirety. The top right image is the side of the current library facing on 249th Street, which is the residential street. That's the side that we want to open up and use as our primarily for our entrance into the library. So the opposite of what you see in the top right. Next. The other corners around the site, this kind of strip urbanism I've been talking about, fairly nondescript. Next. The neighborhood extending to the west on the top left slide, and quiet residential, tree-lined, very lovely for the most part. Church is our neighbor directly to the west. Next. 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 So those were existing slides of the existing facility, unimportant to what we're doing. Our zoning, the key takeaway here is that zoning restrictions mean that the program for the library is essentially twice the allowable zoning. So we are, and we need to put a substantial amount of the program below grade. So that gets us to the second primary idea of what we're trying to do with our design, and that is to make those below grade spaces immediately visible to the library goer coming into the library and to bring natural light down to them. Next. So again, that primary idea, which is of bringing greenery to the site juxtaposed to the strip urbanism. That greenery takes the form of a landscape forecourt, a prominent green roof, and then a garden off of the children's area at the top right of the massing that you see. Next. The second primary goal is of light and visibility into the building and down to the lower, the spaces below grade. So on the top left diagram of two light wells that we intend to put in place right on either side of the entry, and the visibility through and into the building from the entry facade. The lower two diagrams are of the massing of the building, basic and simple idea having to do with two intersecting wedges of form, and one being somewhat more solid and one being somewhat more transparent. Obviously, they derive loosely from the angle configuration of the corner of the site, as well as program distribution. Next. Next. So we have a series of slides here where we've done what we showed you previously, and then what we're proposing now. And I'm going to skip right to what we're proposing now in each case. So as we look at the site, a thing to keep in mind is we straight up the page is project north. Actual north is about 45 degrees off to the left, so that the angled facades on the corner of Northern Boulevard and 249th Street are facing southwest and southeast, and they'll get prominent sun. So a lot of our strategy for the facade on that level is about shading. We set back to create an entry. Okay, you can go back to that for a second, just a minute, sorry. Create an entry plaza that's landscaped. You'll see in the lower left of the plan, there's a dotted area on the landscape plaza that is a storm management a subgrade requirement of our site. It has to be 10 feet away from the foundations of our adjoining building and our building. So the angled form of the building helps put that in place in a cost-effective way. Next. I meant to say that on the left-hand side, you can see it here, on the left-hand side to the west of our building is a maintenance area with gated access. So on the ground floor plan, as you walk in at the center of the plan, you turn right into a vestibule and then into the lobby. What you do with that circulation path is you enter in underneath a canopy that is extension of the roof of the lower wedge. And on your left and your right-hand side, you have the two light wells that are shaded in here. And you experience essentially every major space of the library at the entry and moving through into the first floor. So to the left is the teen space on the lower floor, and to the right, the light well leads down to the multi-purpose space on the lower level. The other thing to say about this is that the adult reading room is a 1.5 high space facing on to Northern Boulevard to give it some real presence and try to take advantage of that shape and the wedge moving upwards. Stair up and down is at the back. Next. The cellar plan has got most important thing here to remember, the lower level plan, prefer to call it that. Teens and the multi-purpose space have the two light wells that are visible on the exterior and experienced by the library goer as he enters the library. They are shaded in light blue. Next. The second floor children's area, the children's reading room occupies the whole second floor, and it is primarily open to with a continuous glass wall to the east, and has its own private garden. Looks out onto that garden, and then beyond that out onto the sloping green roof of the lower wedge. That green roof is also experienced from the windows into the children's area at various sort of strategically placed locations. Next. Our roof plan, we have PV plan for the roof. We're hoping to do more with a DCAS grant. Next. Longitudinal section. I want to emphasize the 1.5 height reading, adult reading room on the first floor with a big transom window facing out onto Northern Boulevard. The children's garden, where you can see that the experience of the large opening of the children's space to the east is of the garden, and then beyond that of the sloping green roof. And then on the lower left, again, an indication of one of the light wells leading down into the teen space on the lower level. Next. Again, the section showing the light well as it goes down, and again now into the teen space at the lower level. Next. Here we see the elevation, the entry elevation, south elevation of the project. The figure at the center is at the entrance. To the right of that figure is the vestibule, and to the right of that is the light well leading down to multipurpose. To the left of the figure is the light well leading down to the teens area. The lower wedge is characterized by fairly deep fins and a flat rain screen panel system. The fins are anywhere from 4 to 12 inches, depending upon whether they're over the glass or over the surface of the panel. And it's also characterized, obviously, by the big graphic, which is a fritted pattern slash super graphic that helps our shading and creates a presence on the Northern Boulevard. The top wedge is flat rain screen panels with a reveal, and then morphing into an opening. Those reveals become openings at the parapet level so that the building starts to quote unquote dematerialize a bit at the top. Next. Again, from now the Northern Boulevard side, you see the deep fins on the elevation and the super graphic facing out onto Northern Boulevard, and above that the children's garden in a sort of sheltered and shaded space. Next. We're sort of blessed by a slight minuscule jog in the property line, so that we can actually continue our deeper fins around to the backside and contrast them to the flat panel expression of the upper wedge coming down to the ground on this face. Next. As one walks down from 249th Street from the residential area, one ought to be able to experience the sort of extent of the green roof extending up on the side of the building. And you can see the sort of glass transparent expression at the first floor and the more solid expression of the upper floor. Next. Series of renderings now showing many of the same things I've been talking about. The more finned expression on the lower wedge for shading and for creation of a more active form, intersecting with the super graphic that is fritted and patterning that morphs into the words library repeated around the corner. Also, what we see here is a start of a primary notion of the design, and that is a very simple and neutral exterior expression in terms of coloration, with a sort of soft and neutral grays and glass and fin shapes. And then on the interior, a continuous wood clad ceiling expression for the bottom of the wedge, and also appearing at the ceiling of the children's space at the top and reemerging at the top, so that the kind of exterior of our building is of this neutral gray, and the interior is of warm wood tones at the ceiling. Also, just to mention that the expression of the fins at the top of the lower wedge tries to be as thin as possible, and we've worked hard to create a detail that makes that work. Next. Elevation now with as a rendering. Again, the light wells just to the left of the first L on the library graphic for down to multipurpose, and the light well down to teens on the other side. So our artwork is envisioned to be in those two light wells, so that when you enter the library, you enter into that exterior space, you turn to go into the vestibule, and you enter the library. You're entering into essentially the zone of the light wells and the zone of the artwork. You experience it from the exterior, you experience it as you walk through it, and you engage it from multiple sides, from underneath, from in front. When the library is closed, it can be seen, and when the library is active and open, it can be seen from the inside as well. Next. View of our building from the residential street. Looking back at those light wells, the teens, light well down to teens on the left with artwork in it, not shown in this image. Next. And the expression on Northern Boulevard with a large graphic. Also, you can see very clearly here the kind of wood ceiling emerging out onto the children's garden at the top of the building. Next. So our materials again are UHPC, ultra high performance concrete, glass fiber reinforced concrete as a panel, rain screen panel system. In order to be able to use and bid multiple vendors, we rely more on the patterning of those the spacing and patterning of those panels rather than the actual surface texture. We'd like to do both, to have both surface texture and spacing, so fins, reveals, and then openings between the panels, as well as surface texture. It depends a little bit on the actual material vendor that we're able to use as to how much of that surface texture we can get. On the bottom left, the wood that I was talking about, that within the neutral gray container provides a kind of counterpoint. Next. So Wendy and Ringo will talk about the landscaping, and I'll turn it over to her. Can she be unmuted, or does she need?
Thank you, George. Does everybody hear me? I'll take that as a yes. I don't see anyone shaking their head. Hello, as George described how the surrounding natural context inspired the decision to face 249th Street, we also looked to the marshlands of Little Neck Bay for inspiration of the curvilinear landscape form. We also discovered that Douglaston Library is located on a greenway network where a lot of hummingbirds have been observed. So we decided to build on this with a plant palette that attracts hummingbirds and other pollinators. Starting with the entry area, since there are wide sidewalks, we took the opportunity to carve out some more intimate spaces for seating in an entrance garden. There are 2 benches, one on each side of the entrance, and 2 rain garden planters along the sidewalk, which define the path. We're proposing new street trees along both sidewalks, and there is a maintenance area that is separate from the entry area at the northwest side. On the second level, the children's hummingbird garden adjacent to the children's reading room, and there's an extensive green roof, which is the area that's shown in light green. Next slide, please. These are more immersive views in the landscape. On the top left, the views of the path and seating area with planters, and the library entrance is just beyond. At the bottom left, the viewpoint is a few steps forward from that one. You're basically in front of the bench looking at the path that cuts through the rain gardens towards the sidewalk. On the top right, the view is from the sidewalk towards the library entrance on the right, and you can see the other bench and seating area. And at the bottom right, the views of the children's terrace with the hummingbird garden surrounding it, the climbing vines and the green roof beyond the parapet. Next slide, please. At the entry level from left to right, we're proposing exposed aggregate paving and a flush concrete curb around the planters, a curved precast concrete bench with skateboard stops, the DOT bike rack near the street trees, and a rainwater collection cistern in the maintenance area. That'll be for harvesting rainwater from the roofs. And then the water will be used at ground level for the gardens and maintenance in the warm weather season. Next slide, please. There's a fence enclosing the maintenance area and a plant guardrail surrounding the plant beds. The 6-foot steel fence matches the color and finish of the architecture, and the 18-inch plant guardrail is made of steel bar that can be bent to the curves of the plant beds. Next slide, please. These are the proposed street trees and the entry garden plant palette. At 249th Street, the tree we're proposing is a bur oak. And since there are power lines at Northern Boulevard, we're proposing a lower growing tree, a thornless hawthorn. The planting palette at the entry is primarily grasses, perennials, and low growing shrubs. And where the planters expand a bit, there's room for a medium-sized multi-stem shrub. All the plants were selected for the site conditions and their habitat qualities for attracting hummingbirds and other pollinators. Next slide, please. The rain gardens, which are highlighted above in the key plan, we're using a similar palette to the rest of the planters for continuity, with the addition of grasses and perennials that like wet soils. Next slide, please. On the second floor, the children's hummingbird garden, the palette at the bottom left is proposed for the area that's around the garden stepstone. That's the area that's marked number 1 on the plan. These are selected for their hummingbird qualities, habitat qualities, and texture. And the character will be shown as shown in the feather grass image, with soft textured grass interplanted with perennials. There's stepstones here to invite children into the center of the garden because we want them to touch and interact with the plants. And then the palette at the bottom right is ground cover and grass mix for the linear planter, where the trellis is marked number 2. And here the sedum is interplanted with grass mix. We've proposed native trumpet vine for the trellis and spring ephemerals throughout this garden for early spring interest. Next slide, please. The green roof is a sedum carpet with a grass mix interplanted in the carpet for texture and height. The interplanting will frame the children's garden as shown in the area with purple dots in the key plan. Next slide, please. For the exterior lighting at the entry, the path lighting is a combination of a low bollard and underbench lighting. The entry vestibule is lit with recessed downlights and an uplight. And the artwork, which is seen through the windows into the light wells, is lit from outside with uplights in the planters. And then there's lighting integrated with the library signage and wall-mounted lighting at the secondary entrances. Next slide, please. And at the second level, there's lighting beneath the canopy that overhangs a part of the children's terrace. And there's an accent strip light in the parapet to highlight the planters. I'm going to hand it over to George now. He's going to finish up talking about the signage. George, are you able to unmute yet?
There we go, finally. I've been hitting the mute button for a while. What we're showing here on the right-hand side at the elevation facing on a Northern Boulevard and 249th Street at the corner is an orange graphic indicating that we hope to be able to light the large graphic in a very subtle and way with a kind of hidden light source. It depends a little bit on zoning interpretation and what we'll be allowed to do. What the large graphic we hope will make clear is that the announcement of the library will be on a large scale, and the signage that required to indicate the presence of the library can be a little bit more discreet and have a sort of happy home in the recess outside the vestibule. So next. Signage right at the entrance as the library goer comes into the landscape plaza and directly faces into the building. Next. The super graphic, as I've indicated, announcing the presence of the library in a kind of car-centric environment. Next. And then the signage right at the entry doorway, all the required signage and sizes to be very visible for the library goer as they come into the building. Next. Font, size, and scale of each of the items for the signage. Next. I'm hoping Misha's on at this point because this
I'm
is
here.
his turn. Great. Great. I hope we made clear where Misha's artwork was, to the left and right of the entrance in the two light wells that extend down to the teens and multi-purpose space. Go ahead, Misha.
All right, well, thanks so much. My name's Misha Khan. I'm an artist and designer. I live and work in Brooklyn. Sarah, if you want to just sort of breeze through some past work. A lot of my artwork uses digital fabrication as well as really classic craft techniques, and kind of melds these two processes, mostly sort of in an abstract, informal way, but with some kind of lucid, maybe surrealist elements woven in, using a lot of different materials. You're seeing some weaving and some pieces in plastic and metal, and mixed media and casting. And so I wanted to bring a lot of this different spirit into this project. This was the sort of initial proposal, and I'm just going to sort of go into where it went to. I was really thinking about what a library means to me and how a library lives in our community. As a kid, my mom's a writer, and so I would sort of get deposited at the library while she would work. And it's this place where you're kind of free to roam and discover so many different elements. And there's all of the history and literature that's accumulated over time, and research books, but also posters and teen periodicals and all of these sort of disparate elements. So I was thinking about how to fuse all of those with what the library is doing, which is kind of organizing all of those elements. Maybe next slide. And puts them together with this really logical structure. And so the library is kind of forming this lattice work of logic that is holding these pieces. So in visiting the library and the sort of surrounding area, there was a lot of elements that I wanted to draw from. And I thought including these elements from the community would make people feel like they were a part of their work and that it was kind of representing them. So one element that's kind of a recurring thing is these thrown rocks. And the rocks come from this Matinecock legend that the way the ground there was formed was from giants throwing these boulders. And the rocks that are in that area are these really porous, or at least along the riverbed, are these really interesting sort of porous rocks. So I wanted to use a lot of those as sort of a land acknowledgement for the new building. The kind of scientific explanation of how the landform is the silt deposits. And so there's also these kind of visuals that I was imagining as silt trails that kind of weave through and help kind of make through lines in the image. There's a lot of other elements, sort of these dreamlike abstractions of the Long Island Railroad and things that could be pulled from books like The Sail from Huck Finn, or I guess there's many things, so I don't know, we could get more into it. But this is the piece that goes on the left side of the entranceway, and then next slide maybe. There's two parts to it. So as you're coming into the library, the sort of more exterior facing one is the one on the left that forms sort of a facade. And what I like about this is I think it really plays with the way the light comes through the trees on that side, and has this sort of dappling effect of further filtering the light that comes into the library. And it also is really more of a graphic experience because you're seeing it face on from the outside. And then the one on the right side forms a more vertical column. Next slide. That you can, as you see here, as you sort of enter the building, you can walk around all sides of this one. So that's the sort of box on the right. And so this one's more of a 360 feel, and the forms are more sort of helical and swimming. Next slide. Both of the works extend slightly down into the downstairs space, stopping at around 9 feet. So from the downstairs, you're going to kind of get the light bouncing through the shapes and see the sort of bottom part of the works that extend into the teen area, as well as the area on the right. And so I think this is a nice way to feel like the work is moving through the whole building. Next slide. Here's a rendering of the two pieces from the outside, obviously without the beautiful landscaping that we just saw. And I think the use of the color is hopefully in keeping with the landscaping, which is incorporating a lot of neutrals, the sort of soft grays and silvers of the building, as well as kind of neutral sand colors. And then adding in these really intense pops of color that feel more sort of floral, or like a fishing lure that got lost in the reeds. Next slide. Here's a sort of a closer rendering of the two pieces, and you can kind of see the way the one on the left is sort of this floating facade, and then the one on the right is more tangled and three-dimensional maybe. Next. Again, this is the one on the left, so you can kind of get a closer look at some of the elements and see the way the forms are playing. And what I hope is that this is a kind of visual that people who are coming to the library every time they come back can keep discovering new elements. And we've talked about a lot of ways that could incorporate with programming, and maybe there's a way for kids to have a map that either lives physically or digitally that kind of can direct them to different points of inspiration or places in the neighborhood or the library where these forms are referencing and coming from. Next slide. Here's the one on the left from the side, as well as the one that's in the right near the sort of vestibule. That's the more vertical one. Next. The material that I propose using is building the lattice work out of stainless steel. And then the 3D printed components would be, which is PLA, would be covered with the UV automotive paint. So they have a really sort of glossy finish that's going to do well in the sunlight. And then the sort of rigid structure from the stainless steel elements that make those pieces attachable. Next. A couple of the attachment sort of suggestion, which is to go through the drop ceiling and then mount some posts into the main beams. So you're gonna have a very minimal point where it comes through the sort of wood ceiling detail in the two spaces. Next. The sort of, obviously the maintenance concern of needing to be able to get in and dust the pieces, they're fairly easy to clean, and we've talked about some ways to get into the space to make sure that it's possible to maintain the work. Next. And sort of another overview shot of the whole thing. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to make this project, and obviously it's a huge piece, and yeah, so excited for the feedback. Thanks.
Thank you for that comprehensive, multidisciplinary presentation. I just hope that the landscape architect appreciates that my screensaver is Boutilua. Comments from questions from anyone? Lori, you must have something.
Very funny. Okay, so I guess, well, we have both the building and the artwork, right?
And the landscape.
And the landscape, thank you. I'm going to defer to you, but I think the building is very elegant, and the massing, and I mean, I think I stated before in my comments, beautifully designed. And I had that question about the light, which I thank you for responding to. And I had one quick question in just looking at the sections. I mean, I'm sure you've thought of this, but the green roof that's, because you're opening up the roof, that double height space to the exterior in that 1.5-story room, George, is that, but then it slopes back. And so I just thinking, if it was my situation, I was thinking like drainage, drainage alert here. So I'm
Right.
not sure you've thought of that, but maybe you want to address that. And then I had, I don't know if Manuel's going to have maybe I will defer to him on the graphics. You have any question about the library graphics for the moment?
Well, it's a good question on the drainage. Am I unmuted? Yeah. We've worked hard to think about the drainage, both at the edge so that we don't end up with a gutter down the full length of the sloping roof, as well as it comes down and into that railing. But we do have an advantage there because because of the sort of pointed nature of the corner, the roof actually slopes in another direction as well. So we just imagine giving ourselves enough area within the depth of the green roof and the insulation, which obviously, as you know, is required to be pretty substantial these days, to create a drainage trough, 8 inches a foot off of the start of the railing for the children's garden. So yeah, it's something we're focused on.
I mean, I think it's very nice in this elevation, the way we see that roof, which I think that's really great. So as a kind of
yeah, and it will be perceived in a number of different ways from the children area, through their windows, where they can actually sort of almost sit alongside it, and then out into the garden area.
So one other quick question I realized I was wondering about are the fins that are, as you come into the front, like what are those? What is that material? It's so long, but it's, yeah. Can you talk
it's the
about
same
that? Yeah.
It's the same material as the siding. So everything is ultra high performance concrete. Depending upon the characteristics of that material, it will either have a piece of steel that it's sandwiches, or it can manage some of the spans by itself. There are different properties for, I think, the UHPC versus the GFRC.
Okay,
but essentially, we've essentially,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering about the thickness of them, and then if you have the steel and then you're trying to continue that relationship to the fin on the building, maybe it's a very thin piece of steel. I don't know.
Yeah, we're looking to make it as thin as possible, as you can imagine. And so, we're somewhere down around 2 inches, I think, if we have to have a piece of steel sandwiched with GFRC.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have 2 comments on the graphic aspects. One is, I'm not exactly sure what the Queens Public Library, graphic system is, but, I'm wondering if it's possible to consult with them, if there should be an inclusion. I know they have like a logo, if that should be included in some way, whether on the door or, on the side of the building, just to tie it to the larger system. They may have kind of graphic guidelines around that, but that's one question I had. And then I like the graphic treatment of the word library, and the kind of functional purpose of shading as well. I think that'll be very nice. I wonder if it's necessary to repeat the word 3 times. That may just be like a placeholder, but, I wonder if there's other text that maybe is related to the neighborhood, or if there's a way to scale the letters so that it's just, wraps around the building just once, or, the word Douglaston, I think, is pretty long. That might be a thing to incorporate too. So
I think in terms of the logo and the graphic standards, they are employed here. And we understand that needs to relate to the overall QPL system. And that definitely will be part of the signage. Library is more about, an effort not so much to announce this particular library. It would have to be Douglaston/Little Neck Library. And it's more to have it function as an abstract. And then, does it become a quote or anything like that? I think we don't want to start having this be the art. We want the art to be what Misha's producing. And so this is sort of, works a kind of compromise between being something that announces this particular library and a really abstract fit pattern that's meant to augment the shading abilities of the fins. I hope that answers your question. And going around the corner, obviously, is just simply about making it a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more curious.
Thanks.
Other commissioners care to weigh in? If not, I will chime in. Deborah, do I see you on mute?
Yeah, I was just wanting to commend the team on the integration of the architecture, the landscape, and the artwork. Misha touched on this in his presentation, that the artwork was thinking about the light in that space, in the entry, and it all comes together in an elegant way, and that's hard to do. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you.
I would agree. I think the artwork, I am not an artist, so take me at my thin knowledge here, is incredibly playful. And I think it makes me smile. And I think it will be, it will attract people to enter. And I think the placement of it is really important. So I just wanted to say that. And I also want to commend the landscape team here. First of all, for doing something that I think is increasingly more important, and that is to look at a site in the context of the larger ecological corridors and figure out ways that we can try to kind of restitch the fragments that have resulted from, the construction and roads and all that stuff that breaks habitat. It's interesting. I just finished a project where I'm also trying to attract hummingbirds. So I was particularly avidly looking at your plant list, and I was pleased that many of them dovetail. But in all seriousness, I think this project is an example of how much good can come out of a true collaboration of people working not only together but simultaneously together. And so thank you all for presenting this in such a thorough and clear and unified way.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right. The next project I am recused from, so I will disappear and be back afterwards.
Thank you, Signe. And our Vice President, Phil Ahrens, is not here, so I will just lead us into the next project. And we'll wait for Signe to go to the waiting room.
Do I need to do something to get there?
No.
You just...
We will... we did it. Sorry. Okay, there she's gone. So the last committee item is the reconstruction of a pier shed and head house and adjacent site work at Pier 94 and the Hudson River in Manhattan. And Grace will let you know. She'll transfer over the control to the presenters and let you know when to begin.
Okay, so Leslie, I've given you control.
Thank you, Grace.
Okay, so go ahead and start when you're ready.
Terrific. So this project was previously approved in 2009. It is a special permit through City Planning Commission. In the end, with the economy downturn in the last 2010 and that, the project ended up being abandoned at that time and was never constructed. So we are coming back now with a different use for the facility. And within that, as we started in on the work, we had to look at some different types of drivers for the project. And you will be hearing as we go through the presentation where we really had to focus on 4 key issues. And one was that the new project represented a substantially compliant conformance with what had been previously approved. So let me see if we can get this to go. I'm not going to present each slide. I think most of you are pretty familiar with the building and its location. So here I think as we look at this and think about the future development of Pier 97 and the view it will have of Pier 94 pier shed, that actually the pier shed is fairly prominent within the view. And we have this lovely esplanade that's coming down the river that right now what we see is that it just dead ends into the existing head house and pier shed. What you will see as part of the approvals was an extension of this promenade along, and then it extends out onto the pier shed itself, terminating in public space at the end. So one of the opportunities and things that we really had to think about was how to embrace and celebrate some of these constraints that are coming from CPC. The next thing we really had to deal with was the change of waterfront resiliency requirements and regulations, both from FEMA and from New York City. So as we continue through to think about these things, it had a major impact to the project and again to CPC and the approvals. So when we think about what has been there, this is the original approval. And as you can see, as I showed you in the photo, this is the esplanade continuing and then coming out and around. We then had dedicated public space here at the north end of the site, public bathrooms, all kind of at the terminus of Clinton Cove Park. In the revised version of this, what we have done is basically had to retain what was there in order to have CPC agree to the substantial compliance. The largest change, and Daniel, when he comes on for the landscape, we'll talk about landscape more, but in terms of the building and the building requirements, the floodplain requires us to elevate this portion of the building. So we had to do some modifications related to FEMA in that. Oops, sorry. So what has changed and what is the requirement? So FEMA has now put the entire waterfront into what they call the VE zone. And the VE flood zone allows for the tidal waves to wash over the pier, and it is required to be 2 feet above the base plane elevation, which in this case is +14. The new base plane for occupancy is +16 feet. Grade is at +8. So this means basically that we are 8 feet above the ground to have any occupancy out on the pier shed. We also have then the AE zone, and the AE zone, which is for the terra firma part of the waterfront, is at +11, which means that for occupancy, we need to be at +12. So again, you're 4 feet above grade, the general grade. And this was a big impact to the project. So here, when we went in for the substantial compliance, what we looked at doing was to retain the height of the massing. This is the same approved 50-foot high, but we were allowed to say, okay, you have to be raised 8 feet. So you're adding the 8 feet in height, but not for occupied space. So that was one of the things that came out of the substantial compliance. What you can see here as we look at these sections, we are now soundstage. This is a soundstage facility. And as such, the requirements are big, large open space, which is very similar to the previous when it was an exhibition type hall space. But because of these clearances and some of the industry standards that are required, there's a need we could not reduce the height and the clear height. I think many of you have seen other projects that have come before you, but soundstage facilities require a lot of clear height to the bottom of the roof trusses. There's light rigs, there's other things that hang off of these trusses. You have catwalks, you have other activities, and the cameras cannot catch these within the view. So because of that, this has not been lowered from the previously approved. This is simply down in a portion of the building where it's not as wide. So as we look through this again, so here we get to the plan. So basically this plan is showing you 8 feet above grade. So while we could call it the first floor, it is not at grade. And what we have here are sound stages. We have 6 stages, of which 5 occur in the head house. The head house is being fully rebuilt. The pier shed is being renovated. One of the challenges from the pier shed, and one of the next things that we focused on as a driver, was the existing pier pile capacity. So this portion of the pier only has concrete piles, which have a much greater load capacity and a greater ability to have weight put onto it. This part of the pier shed, again, existing building, has wood piles that have a much lower capacity for added weight. So programmatically, one of the things we ended up needing to do here was to keep the occupancy and the kinds of weights that would be added to the building to support the program had to be tailored to work with the existing conditions. So we have office use out here. We are using the existing building, but we're already adding the weight of an entire structural slab at +8 above the pier that has to be inserted. So that you have is just already taking away from that existing capacity. So as you can see, we ended up with fairly small, one of the smaller stages that was able to be put out into the pier shed. But that's the primary reason that you end up having the stages in the head house and not out on the pier shed. The other thing, and you'll see in a section later, is because we're keeping the existing roof and the existing framing, is that the clear heights within the pier shed are quite a bit lower. Beautiful for office space, minimum of 15 feet going up to 21 feet. But for a stage, that's limiting. So this is actually going to be a live audience stage where that sloped roof, lower things will work well for that type of production, where these are made to be very flexible. The other requirements of stages is that they have to have vibration control, they have to have acoustical control, and they have to have light control. So all of these things, again, the walls are quite thick. We have to have isolation floor slabs. We have to have a lot of things here that allow this to be a successful facility and allow that people would come and be tenants. The rest of the facility here, you'll see this is production support for the stages. We have 2 entrances. We have the one for visitors and arrivals here, and then there'll be an audience only controlled sentence in the back. In terms of, again, this public space, the dedicated community space has not been reduced at all in this scheme. This just shows you the upper heights and the roof plan. In terms of the site circulation, the community board had expressed some concern with a conflict. This is the existing condition, and this is what is now being proposed. So the bike path and that, as you know, this is a congested corner here coming off of Route 9A. We have the ramps that come up that connect you to Pier 92 roof. And then you have the through traffic that goes down. And there was concern that this was a little too congested at this location. So part of what's been agreed and has been retained is to actually reroute the bike path. And as part of that, there'll be landscaping and a buffer zone between the bike path and the service road that is here. So that has been retained from the previous agreements. I think, you know, the main circulation we've already discussed with the extension here. We wanted to note that the public access part for the pier itself actually terminates at the west. Where you're seeing the pink here on the south side is emergency egress only. It is not open to the public except under an emergency. The rest of the time, there's space ends here. So the termination of the park is quite nice here at the end, and then you can come out and enjoy the views. And then you can see this is the continuity of traffic going to the south further down. We have some parking and arrival here at the entrance. Here on the actual pier shed itself, what's really great now, we will have 15-foot high windows that will line that pier shed coming out. So again, from Pier 97, you will see through this building. It will be active, well lit. Here you see how we have this interstitial floor that we're inserting into the existing structure. And then the wall here that infills by FEMA is required to be breakaway. So when that wave action comes through, while the columns will go through, the infill actually has to wash away from it. It's sacrificed in order to make sure that the structure is not damaged. Daniel now will talk about the landscape.
Thank you, Leslie. As you can see in this overall plan, on the east side, we have a connection from Clinton Cove to the north, as well as from the east, we have from the pedestrian bike path, and the Esplanade continues down south to the pier. The materials that we'll be using for the Esplanade will be the same as what's shown existing in Hudson Park, the same type of same railing, same tree and bench layout, as well as the bluestone and granite paving. Also within Clinton Cove is the hexagon paver, which will continue as well, leading from the bike path, so there's continuous materials. And the enlargement shows from the east, the planter with benches will greet you at where the restroom facilities are, with the indoor amenity space. An accessible ramp leads you up to the platform for the public space, and it is flanked by a planter as well. Heading west, there is a distinctive paving area which will signal additional seating opportunities for overlooking the water. Next slide. And then as we mentioned before, the pier, as you head down, the materials will remain the same. There will be signage leading you from the Esplanade and the bikeway over to this pier. Benches will be further to the west side of the pier that will provide you great views up the Hudson and then lead you to the amenity space on the very terminus of the pier, which has tables and chairs, benches as well that have fantastic views up and down the Hudson and get into distinctive paving. Over this area, which Genslow will speak to further, is a overhang which provides some shade and shelter for the people on in the amenity space. Also to note here, as Leslie mentioned earlier, this end of the pier, the existing structure which has been renovated, has wood piles. We had explored looking placing trees on there, but the weight was too much capacity for the piles to hold.
Right. I think we also have that the original approved scheme did not have trees as well. So again, part of substantial compliance was to stay with what had been approved previously. So I think now getting into the renderings always help us understand how things are. We have our view here from the northeast looking towards the southwest. So as you can see here on the pier shed again, we have this long line of glazing that will allow a view through. There will be the benches and other things that continue out with the Esplanade continuing out and around. We have the stages here There's signage for the stages. I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. It's easier to describe. And then we have this whole lovely dedicated community and public zone here where the park just lands into something that very clearly belongs to them. As you can see here, upon arrival, we have landscaping that will screen this bike path, create a nice kind of softness there. As Daniel was discussing, there's a planter with seating integrated. We've changed the materials here. We want to be sustainable. We want to celebrate the importance of sustainability. So we're looking at doing wood here with a lot of greenery and a lot of planting. You'll have the public bathrooms and then come into the zone with that dedicated space. I think if you look at the previous, this is the previous approved version. I know there's been some question about the glazing and the amount of glazing. So I think just a couple quick comments. The orange part here and this amount of glazing, when you go back and you study that plan, this was the public space. This was all part of the exhibition hall, the pre-function area, but the exhibition hall, which definitely in terms of the massing, there was nothing here to greet you into this and really to tie it well to the park. It was very much part of the building. Here, we're really looking to put something that celebrates the park and the idea of what it would be. Now, this view, again, if you think of that photograph that I paused on earlier in the presentation and what the current conditions are, this extension of this esplanade, the wonderful public space here with an added trellis. This is at human scale. Like, this really works well for the public. It's welcoming, it's their space. Here's their flex room, you know, a nice large room. Again, same glazing that it's always had. There's not any big change here, but this is a much better environment and a much more welcoming environment for the public. Again, here, when you look at this, okay, this was that public space. This really was the exhibition hall and the pre-function. How much the public would have really been using that space is questionable. I do know there's been questions about the glazing. As we explained, this is a sound stage, and a sound stage cannot have glass. It's something between vibration, noise. You think about it, we have helicopters, West Side Highway, cruise ships hitting their horns, you know, heralding people. The amount of acoustical environmental noise around this facility is substantial, and the requirements for those sound stages is quite rigorous. Again, at the west end of the pier, you'll have this lively environment with the umbrellas, the seating. We have the benches that are coming along. We'll have the 15-foot high windows here. There will be a major glass wall at the end of that with, again, a nice canopy covering here to give some protection for both shade and rain that you will see. Again, here was the previous version. The exhibition hall had, you know, less glass than we're able to provide now because, of course, for that kind of business, you can only have so much glass into it. Here we have the east side elevation, so the arrival. And I think you know from the existing photographs, the view coming north up 9A, this ramp that takes you to the rooftop of Pier 92 really obstructs a lot of the view. So we have our loading dock, and a lot of the sort of blank wall is really disguised quite a bit by that ramp. Here we'll have the illuminated signage. This is as of right by zoning tab. This is an illuminated signage that will be the branding for the facility. This is that entrance lobby that'll be a lantern along this facade. Again, the graphic design that is being shown in these renderings is an example of the aspiration that we have for this. We're still not at a point yet to present a specific design, so I do want to be clear about that. This is the precast concrete panel. We're looking at form liners that will give texture, depth, something that would be here on the prominent north end. Whereas once we get towards the back, it'll be a more simple system because we have this major signage element here. What you're seeing represented today is this is a neutral background graphic that will be proposed. Again, this is not the specific. This is showing you aspirationally what we're looking to do. These would then be used by tenants of the building. So a soundstage is rented out for specific production. They would have, if you want to think of it as your movie poster, whatever you wish to, if that term resonates hopefully for you, they would then come and this would be their space to display, not as advertisements, not to say opening September 5th or something like that. It would never display work that is not being produced in the building. So just to be clear, it is not meant to be commercial pipe signage. So here's some detail. We won't go through this today. I think that would come at a subsequent meeting with you to really go through more details on the signage. I think this is here mostly to show you, you know, the references. These are very similar to what was shown and approved back in 2009, where it was exhibitions that were being proposed, similar to what museums and that do. I think here, well, I know we're out of time here. I want to be mindful of that. This is just the reference imagery and some of the things that we used as we thought about the history of waterfront architecture, the motifs, the things that are resonant for them, gantries, things like that, that actually the sound stages, the inside of this will actually look very much like what we used to have here. So again, this is just showing us within the range of what we have. Materials, I think that we've got some initial selections, as we've talked about. We're looking to use precast concrete for the bulk of the head house. For the pier shed, it will be metal standing seam siding, very similar to what is there today. And then for the community public space, we wished to use wood or wood appearance as we would think of it. I think that, you know, there's still work that we're doing in terms of the tones, the final textures that, again, we would come back to you at a subsequent submission to share with you. Daniel has gone through the paving and that, so I think this gives you a pretty good feel for what we're doing, and I'll turn the time back to you.
Great, thank you so much. And so commissioners, does anyone have any comments or questions? Lori,
yeah, I
did
can
you
start.
Oh, go ahead. Okay.
So I had several questions, and I guess the first one would not necessarily be directed to the architects, designers. It would be to the EDC or maybe an agency that's not here. Is that I lament the program use shift here on such a public location. I understand we want jobs. I'm very extremely sympathetic with that, but I just lament the fact that now we have a program use that has no visibility from the west side whatsoever. You know, I thought actually the building was quite handsome before, and the fact that you could look into something that was, even if you couldn't go in, it had a kind of, you could see something, you could see activity, just like you do on a street in the city where you look in. So that's my first comment. And then secondly, so it's not a museum and it's not an exhibition hall, so they're not programs that actually the public can enter. So I know that there's a desire to decorate or alleviate that extreme condition of the west wall, but I think it's hard to justify showing the one sheets from the films, you know, because they're not exhibitions where people are going to participate. So, I mean, and then if there's an idea, I would hope that the designers could actually just show us what you're thinking, you know, show us what's going to go on there, what scale these things are. They're, I guess, like billboards for films that you see as you go up and down the highway. And then the third comment, I had 4 comments. The fourth comment had to do with and I think Deborah might discuss this as well, but the ending of the public space so abruptly, and the fact that, you know, I understand you need to have the fire egress, but the fact that it seems so abrupt, and I know all of this was kind of, you know, in the works before, but it just seems unfortunate, and I don't think people would want to hang out there at the end when there's only one way out. It just seems kind of a scary place, actually. And then there's 2 comments on the materials. One is the wood appearance. I was wondering what wood appearance means. And then the yellow base that we see on the west side, what that is. So those are 4 pieces.
So Lori, thank you for the comments. I have a couple of EDC team members who are managing this project here. Either Young or Bianca, do you want to put your video on and respond to the commissioner's question? I don't know if Nabila is still here.
I don't see Nabila, but I see Young and Bianca, so we'll unmute them.
I can briefly mention. So I think you pointed out from the beginning that, you know, the job is very important. So definitely there was one aspect of this project, because as you can imagine, this industry support a lot of a job for New York City workers. The other thing is also the revenue it brings to us. This is a substantial amount of revenue for the next 89 years from this, this project. But however, we are also very mindful of, you know, public use, public access of this land use. So I don't think these uses and, you know, the revenue and jobs and public uses are mutually exclusive. You know, the tenant and the architect is trying to do to mitigate, you know, the business aspect of isolation of this type of a business in order to incorporate the public uses as much as possible. So as a EDC, you know, we look at different aspects of economic impact, job impact, also public impact with any other project. And after all this extensive research and study, we feel quite comfortable with this proposed use.
I could add something as well, if that's okay. I'm Carol Rosenthal. I'm land use counsel for the project, and I've been involved in this project for the last, I think, 15 years or so. And when the project was, first in place, trade shows were really a city priority and an economic use. And what happened over time with both Storm Sandy and COVID, and also the piers were closed. Piers 92 remains closed because of the structure of the piles and what's going on with them. That never happened, and the world has changed, and now movie and studio production is a very high city priority with tax abatement programs and the like. So the site has sat without use for or with only episodic use, underutilized, because it had trade shows for quite some time, for many years. And so this is really an effort to have a use that not only provides jobs and money to the city, but also provides a mechanism to upgrade this facility, which is very costly and involves also, years of making sure that the piles remain structurally sound, and doing it in a way that meets city priorities, and in a way that we hope, definitely sympathetic and understand the need that this is an area where we would want to give back to the city and the public and make it use for everyone. And so the idea of continuing Clinton Cove Park and having an active place for people to use and have restroom facilities and encourage people to walk out on the pier and have real waterfront access at this location. It's all part of the program and the policy. So I think that's sort of the general, and I'll leave it to the architects to talk a little bit more about the specific design questions that you had, Commissioner Hawkinson. Which I think we might have.
Thank you. So first, just as a reminder, the one stage, stage 6, that is located in the pier shed is an audience stage. So the public just, I happen to be here on Broadway, right across the street from the Late Show. And the activity that you get from the audience coming, the audience queuing, there's always a lot of anxious, people are excited to go and see how it works, to see how TV and that works. So they will be coming to this stage, and they will be, it's handled operationally very carefully and with individuals to guide guests to bring people here. Whether there's audience on other stages, that's open. It could be. But this one, due to the nature of the configuration and some of the limitations, is actually being targeted to be a perfect stage to have live audience. And that always generates a lot of excitement and people arriving to the site to participate in that. So I think that's something to make sure that that doesn't get lost here.
Leslie, I've given you control. So if you just want to point, if you want to move to another slide, or if you want to point to where this stage is.
It's right here. Are you not seeing this?
There we go. Now we see it. Okay,
Sorry.
So that's the public stage, and then any queuing will happen internally.
Yes, they'll probably bring them around here. I don't know if any of you had been. I know ABC Studios, where there are a lot of soaps for many years, and that used to do a lot of tours and that. How much more involvement or opportunities either for the tenancy of the building to help to sponsor or to show or do other things to the community cannot be committed to until those tenants are in place. But they will be neighbors. There are a lot of people actually required to produce these shows. So there'll be a lot of activity. It's not like there's no one coming in and out. As you know, you see when these things happen, catering trucks, other activity that people tend to actually have a lot of interest in.
Deborah, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I'm wondering if we could, I'm pleased to see the nature of the public space that's on the north side of the building is welcoming. And, but I want to think with the team and wonder about the footprint of this pier building, and talk about whether there are, I wasn't present for the approval of the massing. It's clear that the massing has, in effect, the way the head house is privatized what was at least a visually public space. So I'm wondering if we can think together about whether there are opportunities to improve the circulation and the quality of the public spaces, keeping in mind that, as I think it was Young said, that understanding that that jobs and use are a priority for the city, but I would offer the idea that in the West 50s of Manhattan, public access to the waterfront, both visual and physical, is of great value, both for our soul as a city and also of economic value for many of the penumbral effects that public access to the waterfront has. So I would like to have an answer to the question about the nature of that space at the end of the Pier House, and also really the expansive nature of those offices and whether they actually need to be quite that large.
Leslie, do you want me to?
Well, I was just going to say the substantial compliance. This is the existing building and the extent of it. So that is part of the requirement for substantial compliance. Now, in terms of what is happening within the building, obviously that isn't. But there are certain metrics and ratios for studio stage facilities about production office support space. There could be edit suites and other things, but basically it's more of that type of use that goes to support the actual soundstage activities. So I think Carol knows the history much better about how that was agreed and how that got developed, and I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah, I want to say that to the extent that we can think of, ways to make this, public and publicly, an attractive thing for everyone, we are definitely open to it. I don't want to close that door. The constraints that we have is both the space that's needed for the use itself, but also, as Leslie has alluded to time and time again, we got a series of not only special permits, but authorizations and the like from the city. And they were for not only the footprint, but also for the open space, and changes to that will require restarting the project from that perspective, meaning a 2-year, ULURP type process. So we're trying to work very much to get this out in the public and out in the world as soon as possible. And living within the constraints that we have. But I'll leave open the door and have this group go back and we can talk a little bit more about whether, I don't know. I don't want to commit to anything because I don't know enough to do that about what we're all, what the architects and the owners dealing with. But I will say that we have, unfortunately, a number of constraints that we're working within. And what we have done here is, I think it's one of the rare opportunities to have shaded space where people can go out when it's very sunny or even in some inclement weather and, try it as much as possible to make this welcoming for everyone, including
so
our
the space is meant to be at the end of the Pier House, like a sort of, you bring your lunch out, like what are you supposed to do there?
Yeah,
and I also wonder about how do you know it's there? How do you know it's safe? I mean, thinking if I were alone, walking to the end of a pier where I couldn't see what was around the corner and that there was no actual access out the other side, there's, I think, a risk of, I'm wondering how the team is designing around that feeling of being trapped.
Yes, there's a lot of thought. Leslie, that's back to you.
Right. And I think, I saw that Ethel had her hand up. I don't know, Ethel, do you want to add your comment now?
Yes, I would like to. I had my hand up when my good colleague Deborah had her hand up, and I can say that there is much that I reinforce and echo in what Deborah said. Some questions, it's very hard for me to understand actually how much space at the north end will be open to the walker, the pedestrian, the photo that you showed of some people sitting in lawn chairs, and yet it was very hard to know what else was going on, I think is quite questionable. You really, I think, need to, you don't have to, but there are so many questions about the use by the public. It is, of course, an important thing to have studio space. I wonder, and you've emphasized, there will be an audience who may come to what? To what? To a rehearsal, to a screening, to a program? What does that mean? How will it work? How many people? Does it all have to be reserved? Is that essential? But then weigh that, and that's a good thing, of course, in terms of the industry. But I have great difficulty really understanding well enough how the public traverses the perimeter of the space, how it can, in fact, enjoy the several uses that you claim, though it's not clear enough in the illustration. I also am concerned about the ability easily of the walker coming, the person, the people coming from the north and walking along and then seeking to go south and having nothing to do with the studio uses. They are, namely, the public. Secondly, and maybe lastly, even in the years, of course, since the project was first proposed, I mean, it was very great. In the years since, if anything, the use of the piers, the access by the public, the primacy of the preservation of the waterfront, not to be one that is caught in time, but allows the public, all of the public, to be able to use it and adapt to and modify what may be an economically beneficial space, but is, I think, being somewhat downgraded as compared to the flexibility of the need for many different activities and uses by the public, which we can spell out, and I would hope you would be able to consider in a clearer way than, at least at this point, I'm able to see.
Okay.
Are there any other commissioners who have comments?
Just to follow that up, I actually, I'm very familiar with this space. I use the trail for exercise, and one thing I like to do is run on the piers to gain more mileage. And I've come across this particular space, where you end with that wall. It is quite abrupt. But I think that's maybe one use is just like exercise and being able to run around the entire thing, to use it as a public space or walk around it as a diversion.
Right.
I also had a comment too, actually, about the signage, and I know that we'll get to this later, so I don't want to take too much time.
Okay.
But I'm just curious about the framing of the signs. Like, I know that was approved already, but I think the kind of framing of this operator, kind of brands the space as them as the owner. But then on the other side, it says 94, which I think is in keeping kind of like with the nomenclature of all the piers on that site. So, I think there's a bit of a confusion where in the front side, the more public facing or city facing side, it's branded as this, kind of like operator, space. And then on the back, it says Pier 94. I mean, I think that's something that could be studied where, the language of like, the pier numbering could, bring it, to the kind of like city side as well.
Right. We have, this is in fact the brand logo of the studio operator, Sunset Studios. So that is what that sign is for. There are a fair amount of signage limitations as of right under zoning. We cannot put signage, for example, on this north side, and we have some limitations for where and how we can put it here. But there's no question that that can be further studied to bring some of the Pier 9. There, no one is against having Pier 94 on the building. So we will take that comment under consideration and review that. I think in terms of the uses in that, I know that Lori had a question about the graphics and why this isn't fully detailed and shown here. And the reason that we haven't is the design consultant who will be developing the graphics has not been retained yet. We will be getting them something This is in fact, under the FEMA regulations, this is a dry proofing concrete wall here that will go up that 8 feet. And the idea here is that this gives us an opportunity at the scale of pedestrians to create something really interesting that will really help to celebrate some items. Is this the color? Is this the pattern? It hasn't been developed yet. So we apologize if this is something that has offended the committee. It's not our intent to have no idea about it. I think we're talking about what the architectural opportunity is to now come in and develop something that could be very cohesive, that could help. The odds of it being this color and pattern are probably 0, but it will be something that gives some life, some diversity, variety. It could become even something that maybe there's a community tie-in. We would have to go back to the ownership and have that conversation, but that could be something I think that could be very interesting. In terms of the concerns about specific use of this space, this flex room that has been part of the original approval and that is still there, this is to be programmed by the park, programmed through the community, programmed. It is for the public's use. So defining for us to say what it will be is difficult, right? We can't say how this space at the end of the day actually will be used. But I think there could be a variety. There's the nice elevated kind of terrace. Maybe it could be yoga. It could be any kind of, where you have something inside, something outside, and nice weather that's only inside when the weather is less, when it's inclement there. I think in terms of the seating area here, it's under a nice landscape trellis that gives you that opportunity to just, you're coming, you're taking a pause, you've been in the park, and you get to look out on the waterfront. You can meet friends, you can do other things. There's tables, there's chairs. I mean, it's a gathering place. That's its intent. So I think in terms of its use, we can definitely work with Daniel and his team to come back and perhaps make suggestions that make more sense. Carol, I don't know in terms of the park, conversations that have previously been had with the park, but it very much was meant to feel integral with the park and park activities.
And then I think also Dan has talked about, and maybe he's still on, using the materials that are used in the park in order to continue to have it read in that way. So it's clear that it's still part of the public realm.
Okay, we are running out of time. Deborah, I see you have your hand up again. Do you want to go ahead?
Okay. I have one more quick question after Deborah.
Sure, Lori, go ahead, and then I'll follow you.
The quick question is, I realize I forgot to ask because last time I was not able to see the section. It's a huge space underneath the existing Pier building. I really appreciate you're kind of restoring and bringing light into that building, but what is in there? It's just that 8 feet by X number of feet by Y. I mean, I understand
there is nothing. There is nothing there. So,
nothing there?
Whoops.
There's nothing in
so except for this element that you see here, this is where we had shown this infill. There cannot be anything there. It cannot be occupied. There can be nothing structural. So there isn't the ability to use the space. And these will be designed that under the wave action of the river, that these will break away. And that is a FEMA requirement. It is a regulatory requirement. We can't control that.
So because the breakaway panels are there, because there are buildings where it's open, like the one by ARO in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where they really program that under space, or the new Pier building where people think about how that could have actually a use while it just sits there. But because the breakaway panels, you can't have anything in there. Is that right? Is that what I understand?
Well, we can certainly discuss with ownership, but the building is 123 feet wide north to south, and having a ceiling, we actually would have to raise the building even further to have legal headroom there. I mean, that's only, it's 8 foot to the top of the slab, and then it's a foot for the slab, so you only have 7 foot clear underneath. Right, so it would be, or it's 8 foot clear, I'm sorry, to the underside of this, but an 8 foot high for an object that's 123 deep, that's not going to be a particularly attractive space, I wouldn't think.
What's the height of the building? Sorry.
Here it's 31, it's about 40 feet to the top of the building.
It's 2 floors or 1 floor in there?
Just 1 floor, all open.
Okay.
Deborah?
So obviously everything's in the city is a trade-off, and we make choices about what we can do at certain points in time and the kind of economic setting for the decisions we make. And what we have here is a choice that's it's in compliance with the zoning, but it's a different use. And it's been approved, but it presents a much like a privatized identity to the public, as opposed to gathering space, which would be visually and in fact accessible to, let's say, pretty much everyone in the city at one time or another. So what I'm wondering is, you have spoken, Leslie, about the nature of this space on the north side, and clearly it is has been given a great deal of love and attention, and would be a terrific community space and gathering space. I'm wondering if that care can be brought to the entirety of the experience, so that there isn't just this space on the north side, but rather there's a kind of continuous flow along the entirety of the site. So for example, you spoke how on the south side there is that fire access that would only be accessible in a case of emergency. I wonder if it's possible for the team to look at that, so that in exchange for taking this out of public access visually, and in fact, because that's what would happen, could we improve the nature of the surrounding public spaces, and including study, there needs to be study, if there is that public stage, how will people queue? How will people enter? How will that be controlled? It strikes me that that has not been thought through yet. So I wonder, I would like to ask the team to think further about the nature of that theater and how the relationship of the outdoor public spaces relates to the theater. And then further, whether this experience of coming to the end, in essence, at 54th Street could be changed to allow for a kind of continuous flow.
Okay. I would point out that this zone right here is actually, it's a ramped entrance, and that the audience holding would be occurring within that area. When I said that operationally it's a very manual, typically the way these studios or anything, you need to have a lot of personnel that come and really make sure that the control is happening. The audience is anticipated to be about 100 people. In terms of how that ticketing to get in, as you know, typically people do have to apply in advance. There will be security, obviously, people would have to go. It can't just be fully open. However, it is opportunity that's an equal opportunity for anyone. Anyone can
Leslie,
go.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we do have to end.
Okay.
I think thank you so much. You received a lot of feedback today, and we look forward to the project returning with responses. I do want to know, I mean, there are a few times things mentioned, the project mentioned as previously approved, and I do want to note that the project that the PDC approved in 2009 is moot. That approval has expired. Then there's, of course, the CPC, so the Planning Commission, and their permit that you have and that you're hoping to get renewed and that you are trying to be in compliance with and need to be in compliance with. And I do appreciate I can't remember who had mentioned like going back and sort of restudying that. And I think that there may be some room within this CPC approval for some adjustments that would still be in compliance, but may provide a better public open space. So I appreciate that. And we look forward to receiving the resubmission. And now we are going to move forward to our consent agenda vote. We're going to let Signe back in. Thank you. Hi, Signe. Do we still, Grace, are we good on quorum here? One, two.
We do.
Yes,
We have
okay.
quorum. We will not have quorum for one item. Item number. Just give me 1 minute here. 27990 has 2 recusals, so that item will not be able to be voted on.
Okay, that will move to the next meeting.
Okay. So let's see, where are we here on this? So that concludes our committee meeting, and we'll now begin the public meeting with the consent agenda, which are items 27974 to 28003. Staff has noted Commissioner Miranda's and my own recusal from item 27990, which apparently is going to get pushed to the next meeting for lack of quorum, and my recusal from item 27991. Are there any other recusals to note? No, there are no further recusals. So I will now call for a vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, if you could please state your vote for the consent agenda, approve all, disapprove something in particular, etc. Lori Hawkinson, whoopsie.
Approval.
Thank you. Deborah Martin.
Approval.
Karen Keel.
Approval.
Thank you. Manuel Miranda.
Approval.
Susan Morgenthau.
Approval.
Ethel Sheffer.
Approval.
Merrill Tisch.
Errol had to leave.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see why we don't have a quorum. And myself approve all. So with that, the public meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the public.
Thank you, Signe. Thank you, commissioners.
Sure.
I'll see you in a month.
Somewhere.